How do young people afford to buy homes if the savings plans can't keep up with the rising cost of homes?
So, as I said in French a moment ago, we really do believe that housing is one of the, if not the, central economic challenges today. And I'm glad that you framed your question the way you did, asking about young people. Because one of the things that I am the most concerned about, you know, as someone who, it shocks me to say this, is 53 years old, is the intergenerational injustice. My generation, you know, I think my colleagues who are here with me would agree, you know, we had a better shot at buying a home and starting a family than young people today. And we cannot have a Canada where the rising generation is shut out of the dream of home ownership if that's the way they want to build their lives. And that's why this budget is really, really focused on housing. It's focused on people working towards buying their first home with some specific programs designed to aid first-time home buyers. But I agree with the premise of your question that that is not enough. Because the core problem with housing in Canada is we just don't have enough housing. It's just a mathematical thing. Canada has the fastest growing population in the G7. That is fantastic. That is actually a huge driver of economic growth, and it is one of Canada's competitive advantages. But we cannot have the fastest growing population in the G7 without also having the fastest growing housing stock in the G7. And we don't have that right now. We have a shortage of homes. This budget is absolutely targeted at getting more homes built in Canada. Over 10 years, we are committed to doubling the number of new home starts. And that's going to be your long-term answer to housing affordability in Canada. It is not going to happen overnight. Housing is a very complicated challenge, and building a home is a complicated task. And housing is an area where the federal government, municipal governments, provincial and territorial governments all need to work together, and that's complicated too. But what I do want to say to Canadians is we get that this is a problem, and we are rolling up our sleeves and getting to work on it and putting forward a set of measures that are going to make things better.
And next question, I'm sorry, is it one question?
What could possibly keep the price of homes down?
I think I've just answered that. You know, the key measure, the key insight in the budget, in our housing plan, is understanding that the driver of Canada's housing affordability challenges is we just don't have enough supply. And as a country, we have to work together to get more homes built faster. This budget puts in place, for the first time from a federal government of Canada, some very specific measures to remove the roadblocks that are there to getting more homes built. And that's what we're going to do.
Oui, bonjour. Pour Radio-Canada, Jean-Philippe Hughes, et pour mes collègues de CBC.
Canada, I'll take an answer in English or French, please. You said there's going to be a register of companies in Canada, but title to that. But title to property is in fact a provincial jurisdiction. How will you know when a Russian oligarch comes in to buy a property, because we don't, the provinces don't keep such a register? That's an excellent question. We have begun working on this question of transparency. In last year's budget, we mentioned another objective as well, to go forward with a registry for an ownership. We presented the concept last week in the budget. We've added some detail since then, and we have to do it more quickly. And you're absolutely right. You talked about Russian billionaires, and that's one of the reasons for which I think that we must truly have transparency and accountability on this matter.
You're also right. It's a complicated issue because the federal government has to work in cooperation with the provinces and territories to achieve this goal. But I think that today there is a consensus across our land that it's not acceptable to have property without transparency. It's not acceptable that to have wealthy people from abroad buying property in Canada. So we're going to work with the provinces and territories, and Canadians that are in agreement with us will also engage with their own provincial and territorial governments to stress the importance of this resolution.
Very important question. I believe that transparency when it comes to beneficial ownership is really important for our democracy as well as for our economy. And that's why actually we made a big push for beneficial ownership transparency with a fully searchable register in the budget last year. This year, we went further and offered more details and a much tighter timeline, because events in the world and also in Canada have drawn, rightly, attention to this issue. I think that Canadians would all agree that we need to know who owns Canada, and we need to know what money is flowing into assets in Canada. Now, you did point out in your question that doing this is hard because it requires work between the federal government and provincial and territorial governments and municipalities. And you're right, it is hard. Doing a lot of things in Canada is hard. My view on this question, on the issue of beneficial ownership and transparency, is that my view, and this is also my hope, is that we're at a moment where there is a real national consensus. I'm not sure who wants to get up and say, I'm in favor of opacity when it comes to ownership in Canada. I'm in favor of not letting Canadians know who is buying stuff in our country and who controls Canadian assets. That's not a position I think any leader wants to take. I think all of us are of the opposite view, and that's why while I absolutely accept that it's going to take some hard work to get there, and I certainly accept that working between the federal government and the provinces takes time and patience, this is an issue where I really hope and believe there is a real national consensus we have to get it done.
Si je peux me permettre, la Colombie-Britannique vient de lancer un registre justement pour les véritables propriétaires.
British Columbia launched a project for beneficiary landowners, and it's associated with some fines. So, will Canada have to rely on will Canada have to contend with unreliable data? Well, let me just reiterate. It's a difficult proposition because it's new. But the reality is that just because it's complicated doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. On the contrary, I think that it's unacceptable that today we don't have reliable data as to who owns property in Canada. And we said in last year's budget that the federal government is going to take the leadership on the issue in order to promote transparency.
Virginie Anne, the Canadian Press. I was wondering if you could just start by kind of resuming exactly what's the message today that you brought to Montreal, and why did you decide to start your first few public appearances after the budget was introduced?
OK, en français, en anglais?
In English, please.
OK. This is my first, the events in Montreal, the speech at the Chamber of Commerce is my first, the first event on my post-budget tour.